Ted Doors. So we have decided to shift our scheduled report on psychic phenomena to a future date. And I think we know that those of you who had planned to see this appreciate the fact that as a news broadcast, events sometimes dictate our lineup. So after this brief message, we will tell you what 2020 has found about the Grenada weapons story. Up front tonight, 2020 has obtained confirmation that the Pentagon's Inspector General will soon release a report clearing Admiral Joseph Metcalf of wrongfully importing souvenir weapons from Grenada. But what 2020 has also found out is that one of Metcalf's aides will be held accountable for bringing the weapons back to the States. Now, this might anger anew those who see a double standard in prosecuting only some of those implicated in the affair. Geraldo Rivera and a 2020 team have been investigating this story.
The successful invasion of Grenada was about the only unqualified military victory our country has enjoyed since the end of World War II, almost 40 years ago. But even that victory was not without its cost. About 20 of our men were killed in the invasion of the island, and dozens more were injured. But the dead and the wounded were not the only casualties. Consider, if you would, the case of Captain Ted Doors and his family.
When we did our job and did it relatively well, we came back as heroes, unlike the Vietnam veterans, unfortunately. And it needed to be done.
And yet for you, Grenada was the end of the road, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
29-year-old former Army Captain Ted Doors, a career officer, was court-martialed last summer for taking 3 of these Soviet-made automatic rifles captured from the Cubans in the Battle of Grenada. In unlawfully bringing home those war souvenirs, Captain Doors was one of hundreds, perhaps thousands of other Navy, Marine, Army, and Air Force personnel attempting to do the same thing. But his case is different than most of the others. Ted went to jail for it and got dishonorably discharged from the Army.
Why is it just us? Why have we only been the ones to have to go through this? Has been traumatic beyond belief, and how do you express that to people? You just go on with your lives, but the military was our life.
Well, I don't think there's anything morally wrong with collecting war souvenirs. I think it's the right of any soldier to have the weapons that were used to try to kill him.
Where were these weapons headed?
As souvenirs to a museum. My intention was to give them to my alma mater as a war souvenir, as had been done in the past by the graduates.
Ted Doors' alma mater is the Valley Forge Military Academy in Pennsylvania. He was first captain of cadets and headed toward his career in the Army with great expectations. He and his wife Lori were married in the Academy Chapel. She's the daughter of a retired lieutenant colonel. All 3 of her brothers were also military officers, and the museum Ted says was going to get his weapons is lined with souvenirs brought back by previous graduates from the fighting fields of Europe, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam.
You feel you were made a scapegoat?
I get that impression now. Scapegoats are normally people who are singled out for some strange reason and dealt with. And you don't see hundreds of scapegoats, you just see 1 or 2 scapegoats.
If Doors is a scapegoat, he's got company. Former Army Staff Sergeant Alan Cassett was with Doors in Grenada. He also brought home a Soviet-made weapon and hung it over the bar in his home, a trailer near Fort Bragg, North Carolina, that he shares with his wife and 3 children. Arrested in March of '84, he was also court-martialed, sentenced to prison, and given a bad conduct discharge. The winner of 7 air medals in Vietnam, Cassett works now as an auto mechanic, and last year filed for bankruptcy.
It just numbed me all over. There's really no way you can explain it. Just sudden shock. I didn't think it would go this far, to be honest with you.
Marine Corporal John Palutnik brought his weapon home to Missoula, Montana during leave. He was just discharged last month after spending 37 days in the brig and being busted from corporal down to private.
What did you want the weapon for?
It was pretty much a memorial to me. It was a weapon that I'd been shot at with, and a lot of Marines that in the last 20 years have been killed with. Eventually, I imagine my kids would have gotten it. I hung it on the wall downstairs.
John's father, Chuck, is a Marine Corps veteran of the Korean War.
Are you proud of your son's service record?
Very definitely proud of it.
How does this make you feel? Do you feel it's been blemished?
To a degree. I mean, I'm a little disgusted with the Marine Corps, being an ex-Marine.
Unlike the three cases we've so far presented, it must be noted for the record that several other men probably did deserve the punishment they received. Those who attempted to sell the captured weapons, for example, without regard to who was buying them or how the dangerous automatics were going to be used. But that was not the case with Palutnik, Cassett, or Dors. The Dors case seems even more unjust when you consider he turned his weapons in under an amnesty program, one offered by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. But the Army refused to honor that civilian grant of immunity, and the civilian authorities refused to honor their promise to protect Dors.
When he was arrested, we were upset, but we weren't worried for the fact that we felt we were covered by the amnesty program.
Everything that seemed so obvious, the amnesty, the intent to get the weapons off the street, seemed to be a farce.
When you think of all the real crime, the violent crime that plagues this country, GIs coming home with war souvenirs does seem like pretty small potatoes. At this parade in New York City, in honor of the veterans of Vietnam, I asked some of them what they thought about the court-martial of Captain Dors.
All wars have souvenirs. Go back to Civil War. They always brought back a souvenir. It's part of the deal. Winners take the spoils.
Without a doubt, to these Vietnam veterans, as to the rest of the country, the single most controversial aspect of this case is the admitted involvement of Vice Admiral Joseph Metcalf III, commander of the Grenada Invasion Force. Upon the victorious admiral's arrival back in the United States, customs agents found cases containing 24 of the Soviet-made weapons on board his plane. The Navy began an investigation, but it didn't last long. Because he was the senior man, the admiral graciously accepted responsibility and then ordered the investigation closed. He later received a formal letter of caution and has since been promoted.
The higher echelon does it, and they get set away with it, no problem. The lower man does the peon, he gets court-martialed. It isn't right. It's not fair.
John Lehman is Secretary of the Navy. He spoke with ABC News just after the Metcalf story broke in February.
The court-martials were for much graver offenses than what the admiral did. So there is no double standard. The enlisted personnel were given amnesty. The admiral was given a letter, and all future cases, and there are several more under investigation, will be handled appropriately. There is no inconsistency in any of the handling of the Navy and Marine cases.
At least 350 weapons were turned in during the amnesty programs, and the guns' owners not prosecuted. Corporal Palutnik was apparently prosecuted because he got caught. Well, Admiral Metcalf also got caught by U.S. customs agents, and he was not court-martialed. That seems inconsistent. And listen to this analysis of what happened to the Navy admiral as opposed to the Army captain. William Canaire is Ted Dors' civilian attorney.
The comparison is striking, I think. Admiral Metcalf admits to taking 24 weapons off that island through his staff, right out of the warehouse. Captain Dors has been found guilty of taking 3. Admiral Metcalf was caught by U.S. customs agents. Captain Dors, the evidence of his trial was that he voluntarily turned in his weapons, voluntarily turned them in to alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agents with a promise of amnesty and anonymity, both of which agreements they breached. Admiral Metcalf says, when he was questioned about this by Naval Investigative Service agents, I didn't know it was wrong to bring guns back. Captain Dors didn't know it was wrong to bring guns back. Metcalf says it's a military tradition. For the victors belong the spoils. Captain Dors, it was a military tradition. Admiral Metcalf had a full staff with him, military lawyers to advise him. Captain Dors, he didn't have any legal staff or any advisors. The bottom line of the whole thing is Admiral Metcalf was admonished for his acts. I believe the words were, he's been advised that the next time he leads a successful invasion, he should look a little more closely at regulations. And eventually he was promoted to a very responsible position. Captain Dors, he was tried, he was convicted, he was jailed, he was locked in Fort Leavenworth in sea confinement, and he was thrown out of the military. And based on his analysis, the analysis of the Secretary of the Navy, the only crime that Captain Dors is guilty of, apparently, is joining the Army instead of the Navy.
In late February, that's shortly after Common Cause magazine broke the story of the guns of Admiral Metcalf, the Defense Department's Inspector General, Joseph Sherrick, announced his office would be doing its own investigation into this matter. Well, that report is now completed, and it's making its way through the halls of the Pentagon. Although it's not yet been released publicly, 2020 has learned some of its key conclusions. First, the Navy's justice system will be severely criticized for allowing a commander-in-chief, in this case Admiral Metcalf, the power to stop an investigation into his own alleged wrongdoing. Congressman Jack Brooks is chairman of the House Committee on Government Operations.
If I control the investigation, who goes? Me? I'm last to go. Everybody else goes before me. And when they run the investigation, they limited the criminal investigation. They didn't get all the facts. Who knows what they got? Who knows what really happened? Who knows whether or not some subordinate would put on the Admiral's plane 24 automatic weapons without his approval? He wouldn't say, "Look, what a surprise I brought for you, Admiral. 24 of these rifles." That doesn't make sense.
2020 has learned another key, though perhaps unsurprising, conclusion of the IG's report. The Admiral will be found essentially blameless. Although one of his aides in Grenada, a commander named W.J. Roble, is apparently headed for troubled waters, 2020 has learned that he will be accused of serious charges regarding the guns. He's already hired a civilian attorney. So the Inspector General of the Pentagon has apparently decided to make yet another example. Instead of trying to undo the harm, some might argue the unnecessary harm, already done to Dors, Cassett, and Palutnik.
I know that they've got very stringent laws against automatic weapons now, but the tradition in this country, in the world since Genghis Khan, has been you picked up the sabers and the swords and the rocks and the sticks that they were fighting you with. And I brought home a few Japanese sabers when I came back from World War II, and I've still got them, and I'm going to keep them. And I'm just glad they didn't have automatic weapons. I might have been in there with that seaman. Or maybe I'd have been there with the admirals, fat and happy.
Fat and happy.
He's got great style, doesn't he?
Geraldo, the report has not been formally submitted. So right now, as we talk, 10 o'clock tonight, where do things stand?
Well, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines will not talk to us officially. So what I tell you is based on our investigative reporting. As of right now, Commander Roble is going to take the fall. He is the person that is going to take responsibility. He is being given the responsibility for those 24 Soviet-made weapons on the Admiral's plane. He was a member of the Admiral's staff. So even though the initials on the rifles were to high-ranking people, the Admiral included, and other high-ranking dignitaries, the commander who allegedly put the initials on the rifle is the one who is going to be held responsible.
Fall guy.
The fall guy. That's what it is.
What can be done for these young men?
Well, I think nothing should happen to Roble. Nothing should happen to the three fellows we've profiled. I think even the Admiral has been unnecessarily embarrassed by this thing. He's the closest thing to a war hero we have right now.
Okay, who can change things?
I think the Secretary of Defense Weinberger, is the only person who has the power to do it.
So it goes right to the top?
Right to the top. He's the court of last resort for these fellows.
We'll see. Thank you, Geraldo.
Right.
When we return, a former president whose vitality and comments may surprise you. Barbara's recent interview with Richard Nixon. Right after this. When by his own hand, Richard Nixon lost his presidency, lost its power, pride, and glory, many believed that Nixon would never be heard from again. Well, that hasn't been the case. While he has kept a low profile, his successors have on occasion relied on his insight and expertise. Most recently, President Reagan, before his controversial trip to Europe, sought Richard Nixon's advice. And Nixon has just published his 5th book since his resignation. It's called No More Vietnams. But has time changed Richard Nixon? Well, recently, Barbara visited him in his New York office.
Richard Nixon surrounds himself with mementos. Pictures of Mrs. Nixon happy in China, of his 4 grandchildren, 1 by daughter Tricia and 3 by daughter Julie. His eldest granddaughter, Jenny, the image of her mother, in an Easter hat purchased by Nixon. A piano player and his fans. On a corner table, time stands still. Old magazines with pictures of the Nixons during their White House days. In these unpretentious surroundings, we talked about President Reagan's visit this week to the cemetery at Bitburg. Sir, would this have happened in your administration? I guess what I'm asking is, how does a thing like this happen? You've been in the White House. How do you get into this situation of such mistakes?
Well, I must say I've made my mistakes, as we're quite aware, and ones that were much more devastating from a personal standpoint than this is going to be to President Reagan. These things happen sometimes. What has happened here is it's a tragedy of basically misunderstandings, misconceptions, tragedy of errors, perhaps. But once Chancellor Kohl did it, gave the invitation, once President Reagan accepted it, then for Chancellor Kohl to withdraw it, apparently he was not willing to do that because he thought it would hurt him at home. And for President Reagan to say then, whatever you do, Chancellor, I'm not coming, I think it would have a devastating effect on him.
Why?
Well, because, let's face it, as you look at the Germans today, they are the strongest ally we've got in Europe. Without Germany, NATO is nothing. Germany is the only European nation that the Russians fear. Without the Germans, there is no way you could hold the line in Western Europe. No way. Unless you nuke them.
Did you call the president, or did he call you?
No, having been in that office, I don't call him. He calls me, usually. And in this instance, the call came from Don Regan's office, from him, asked for my advice about the thing.
Sir, do you talk to the White House on a regular basis?
No. I generally prefer to send my advice when it's requested in writing. You know, I find that unless you discipline yourself to write, you talk too much.
May I ask if you have been invited to the White House? And if you were to a state dinner or something, would you go?
Well, of course, we were invited to the White House on the occasion of when the 3 presidents made that historic trip to Sadat's funeral.
Yes.
We have not been invited to a social engagement since, but I don't think it's any affront. And as far as going is concerned, you know, President Reagan made a very interesting comment. He went up when the environmentalists in California, the Sierra Club, were after him about doing something about the sequoias. He said, well, when you've seen one sequoia, you've seen them all. And I could say that when you've seen one state dinner, you've seen them at all. We have no particular desire to go back again.
Let us now turn our attention, sir, to the Soviet Union. The Russians have refused to apologize for the shooting death of Major Nicholson in East Germany, and yet we talk about a summit. What should we do?
There will be a summit during President Reagan's second term, and there should be. But it is one that should be well prepared. As I have put it, when the 2 powers meet, there's going to be enormous attention paid to it. And a summit, if I may paraphrase, cannot labor and produce a mouse. Let's disabuse ourselves of this sort of silly notion. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Gorbachev and Reagan could just get together and meet each other and know each other? Because each would charm the other. We would find that our differences weren't all that great. And then after they had completed the meeting, they would shake hands and go home and live happily ever afterwards.
Baloney,
now, that doesn't happen even with friends, and it seldom does. And it certainly doesn't happen with potential adversaries. What we're really saying here, the tension between the United States and the Soviet Union is not a problem to which there's a solution. The tension which exists between our 2 countries is a permanent condition. It can be alleviated, but it cannot be cured.
What do you think of the president's decision to have an embargo against Nicaragua?
I support it. I do not think that that will be adequate in terms of getting the Nicaraguans to cut their ties to the Soviet bloc, getting them to give up some of the repression.
Won't it push them even further into the Soviet arms?
The same argument was made, Barbara, you recall, I'm sure well, I'm old enough to recall, the same argument was made with Castro. I was around in 1959. And what happened is that Castro didn't need a push. He was already there. The idea that Ortega this very intelligent, very tough fellow who was over giving an abrazo to Mr. Gorbachev will be pushed into the Soviet arms is ridiculous. He is a dedicated Marxist-Leninist, just as Castro was. And as far as that's concerned, the idea that if we follow policies that are too tough with him, he's going to become more pro-Soviet is ridiculous. He's there already. Let me make one thing clear. I do not think that our goal should be to overthrow the government. That isn't going to happen. The Contras aren't strong enough to do that. Our goal should be to bring enough pressure on that government that they, in their own interest, will have no choice but to give up on their foreign adventures.
When you wrote in your book about Vietnam, you said we won't get over the Vietnam syndrome until we stop using this intellectual junk food. What do you mean by intellectual junk food?
By intellectual junk food, what I was referring to was the whole orgy that we have been exposed to in the past few weeks. You know, I watch a little more television than I used to. As you know, it's not my favorite medium. and I'm not their favorite.
Just give the news, please.
But on the other hand, I would say that as far as that is concerned, we have been inundated with this hand-wringing about Vietnam. And we see these happy Vietnamese women, girls, riding their bicycles through Ho Chi Minh City. And we hear how wonderful it is there and so forth. We hear that as a result of our leaving, that now things are moving better. Well, they're not. Now, what I mean is that that's intellectual junk food. What we have to do is to hear the truth about what has happened, and then we will realize that we must not let that happen again, not in Nicaragua or anyplace else.
Since you brought it up, sir, why don't you like television?
Well, television is a medium that I think, in terms of the kind of discussion we have now, is not one that allows for the kind of really consideration and depth that we need. Mm-hmm. Now, your program does it to an extent, but you're the first to admit that if you were to ask me now, what do you think about Star Wars, Mr. President? I can't answer in 1 minute. I could, but it would be, frankly, intellectual junk food. It wouldn't be a real substantive answer. As you know, the attention span is very small. In fact, I'm probably being cut off now because I'm talking too long.
You may very well be. I'll go on to the next question. I cannot sit with you and not talk about politics because it's just too much fun to do it with you. Look ahead, if you will, with me and tell me what you see as the winning ticket for the Republicans. The winning presidential ticket for the Republicans.
The way I look at 1988 is this. At the present time, if the economy holds up and is good in 1988, George Bush will be nominated and he will be elected. If the economy does not hold up, George Bush will go down with Reagan's popularity, and then there will be someone else.
Kemp?
Possibly Jack Kemp,
yeah.
Provided Jack Kemp is able to separate himself from the Reagan policies, which would be difficult, because I don't think he would want to do that, because I think he believes in the Reagan policies. But if the economy goes down, then you would probably see a Democrat winning. As far as the second spot in the ticket is concerned, I think you're more likely to see a woman on the Republican ticket than on the Democratic ticket. The Democrats have tried and been burned. Now, that is no reflection on Mrs. Ferraro. It just happened she ran at the wrong time on the wrong ticket. Mondale was going to lose anyway, but as far as the Republicans are concerned, they'll be riding on a blank page. And the Republicans are weaker among women than they should be. I think the possibility of a Republican, be it either Bush or Kemp, picking a woman is quite high.
Jean Kirkpatrick, everybody's saying perfect choice, vice presidential candidate.
She is certainly eloquent, and she has great support among the conservatives, the Hawks, and among the Republicans.
You think it's a good idea?
The question, I can answer that question better to see how she conducts herself when she gets out there under the fire of the press and so forth in non-foreign policy issues. Nobody knows how you run on that fast course until you've been there. I would say at the present time, Mrs. Dole would perhaps have a better chance even than Jean Kirkpatrick. Now, do you want to go to the Democrats?
Sure.
I would say first that Gary Hart, I thought after hearing him at the Democratic convention that he was finished because it was sour grapes. But he conducted himself very well during the campaign. He has recovered. he is a formidable candidate for the nomination. In his case, however, some way he's got to warm up. He just doesn't seem to have the warmth that he comes through too cold to me. And this is no pun, he really needs a heart transplant. I think, however, that the man that is most likely to be nominated is Cuomo. If he wins a landslide victory in New York, which I think he will, then he will be very hard to stop.
What about Ted Kennedy?
Well, I know that he's slimming down again for a race, but the trouble is he's running in the wrong direction. He is the last hurrah of the old Democratic establishment. I don't think he's going to make it.
I'd like to talk just a bit about you, sir. Your books have been very successful now. Your opinions in foreign policy are being sought after by leaders in this country and elsewhere. It seems to be, in a sense, the resurrection of Richard Nixon. Does that help to heal the wounds? How does it make you feel?
Yeah. Well, I'm not holding my breath for the resurrection. As far as the public reaction is concerned, I realize that I have a lot of people out there who, as has been the case throughout my political career, who are very strongly antagonistic. I have some that are very supportive. And at the present time, I appreciate the one and respect the other. Mm-hmm. That's what you do as you get a little older. And as I sit here today, 10 years after the end of Vietnam, almost 12 years since I left the presidency, I'm just thankful that I'm still alive and able to conduct an intelligent conversation with a very tough questioner.
How are you feeling, sir? We heard you had shingles and bad virus.
I'm afraid this is going to disappoint all of my enemies out there because I'm afraid I'm going to outlive them.
How is Mrs. Nixon feeling?
Well, as I know she's one of your favorites.
Yes,
she's quite a remarkable person. I speak of what I've been through, but you know, for a woman to suffer in silence during the difficult last days in the White House and the days thereafter, which were even worse, is much more difficult. And then she's had 2 strokes. If you were to see her, you wouldn't know she'd had a stroke, but she doesn't have the stamina she once did.
How would you like to be remembered?
I suppose everyone would like to be remembered particularly for his major achievements. Most people would point, for example, to the opening to China, which changed the world. But as I look back during the White House years, I think, for example, of an initiative which many people have forgotten, the Cancer Initiative. You remember we started that in 1971, and it was brought home to me just a couple of days ago. My brother, Don, has cancer. It's a very serious case. He's now taking radiation and chemotherapy. 10 years ago, his doctor told him he would be dead. So that initiative may have helped prolong his life and the life of other cancer patients. What I'm suggesting here is that we all think of, well, he went to China. He ended the war in Vietnam. He opened relations with the Soviet Union through détente. But in my view, if the Cancer Initiative, which we began, could save lives, that'd be worth all the rest put together.
Hugh, who would imagine that what he would want to be remembered for the most was his research on cancer?
Yeah,
That's
having
surprising.
nothing to do with politics.
Foreign policy, yeah.
Surprise. Many people will remember your first interview with Richard Nixon in the early morning at a time when networks didn't do that unless it was on a pool basis, and you got one alone with him.
It's a while ago.
You've had a chance to observe the man now because you've done other interviews in between. In what ways do you perceive that he has changed since then?
When you've got nothing to lose, you can afford to be very outspoken. This is a mellow Richard Nixon.
Do you feel that he's rehabilitated?
In terms of his foreign policy, who ever thought that 10 years ago after Watergate, anybody would ask his opinion on anything? When it comes to foreign policy, he is respected, maybe because that's our foreign policy is in somewhat of a vacuum. But in general, he still has his enemies. One thing, though, he's always interesting to talk to.
Indeed so. Thank you, Barbara. Well, next on 2020, maybe you know someone like this character portrayed by Jason Robards.
She forgave me. Same way she forget me when I show up from one of my periodical drunks.
In real life, Jason Robards is a recovering alcoholic. And when we come back, you'll see the power of his personal touch. Right after this.
It's all there. It's all there at the start.
Actor Jason Robards. His greatest triumph was recovering from the disease of alcoholism. Now he's sharing that freedom with others. His personal touch. When 2020 continues.
"2020 has, as you may know, a series called Personal Touch. And we think it's making a difference in people's lives. Because when a famous person reveals how he or she has confronted a crisis, it gives courage to others who are challenged in the same way. For 3 decades, Jason Robards has been one of our most admired and most popular actors.
Get out of my house.
Just his performance in The Day After was seen by an estimated 100 million people. Tonight, you're going to see Jason Robards in a very different role. He is a recovering alcoholic, which means he cannot ever take another drink without relapsing into the disease of alcoholism. And he works to fight the stigma and tragedy of alcohol abuse. One of Robards' most acclaimed roles was in the Eugene O'Neill play, The Iceman Cometh. He played Hickey, a man whose life had been destroyed by alcohol. Recently, with the help of experts on alcohol abuse, 2020 brought together some recovering alcoholics to see Robards reprise portions of that role, inspiring others with his own personal touch.
Anyway, she forgave me. Same way she forgive me when I show up from one of my periodical drunks. And you all know what I'd be like at the end of one of those, huh? You've seen me like something lying in a gutter no alley cat would lower itself to drag in, like something they threw out of the DT ward at Bellevue along with the garbage, like something that ought to be dead and isn't. Well, Evelyn wouldn't have heard from him.
Everybody knew, all my friends knew I was an alcoholic, but I didn't know it. I was the last one to know. I just detested it, and I said, I'm not like these people. I'm different.
The last 6 months were absolute terror. It was just total consumption.
And you can't recall leaving the job and getting home. Here you are in the apartment.
I can remember looking in the mirror and starting to cry and say, what's happening to you, Joe?
And then one day, the door would open, and in I'd stumble, looking like what I said, into her home, which she kept so spotless and clean, and I had promised it would never happen again, and here I was, swearing again. It's the last time, and I could see disgust.
We all have our horror stories to tell, to go through or die in the process of abuse of this drug of alcohol, which is a drug that we condone, that is legal.
I kept a journal during my 30 years of drinking. And every day I promised tomorrow it wouldn't happen again.
I didn't start drinking till I was 40, and this alcohol is so strong. My disease was so strong that I thought I was drinking medicinally. I thought it kept me alive.
The bottle beckoned all the time, and the bottle, even in the midst of the pain and suffering, gave me laughter and joy and fun and brightness, maybe for a couple of hours before I got dead drunk. In my profession, we used to pride ourselves. I guess it goes back to the Greeks for the Feast of Dionysus. Actors always getting loaded. You know, after the show, everybody having a great time. And, you know, so we didn't have such a bad feeling about it. We thought, oh, it was great to be macho and get loaded.
Well, I have to...
See, that's another strange way to be pulled into alcoholism. I started drinking during the war. Never did as a kid. I was an athlete in school. For many years, the drinking was not a problem, partly because I did not desire to do it that much. I had too much work to do. It's only after I started to make success that I couldn't cope with it. Well, it's all there. It's all there at the start. Everything that happened afterwards.
I never could learn to handle temptation.
Alcohol became abused in my life, I would say, when I was in my 40s. Everyone is different. It takes a number of years to go on to build this up. Other people, it could take a few months.
My name is Judy, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm also a nurse. I was 26 before I picked up my first drink, and I started drinking daily and heavily right from the beginning, probably pretty close to a fifth and a quart a day. And I knew of no way out, and I knew I was in trouble soon.
For the last 6 months, it was 24 hours a day. I was drinking in order to stop the shakes. Then I had to drink more to stop the shakes because I drank, then the shakes would come, and then I would have to drink more. It was just that round-the-clock consumption that was incredible.
When I tell someone that I'm an alcoholic, they're usually stunned, and they don't believe me. Like, how could you be an alcoholic? You're so young.
I got very, very drunk on a flight. And when we got to our destination, I was sort of in a semi-blackout, but I heard the stewardess say, "Get a wheelchair, she's too drunk to walk." That sobered me up. But it took another terrible binge before I really realized that this is it. But I remember all this so clearly, and I just feel I shrink, and my self-respect was totally gone.
And that horrible feeling, that pain that comes from this guilt and the shame, that you can't function as you're supposed to, and you can't stop. I just wondered if some of your ways of controlling your drinking.
No, I never tried to control it until I quit. I never, I was defiant. Oh, if they don't like that, I'll just drink some more. I don't like that. I don't give a damn about these people. That kind of anger, you know, saying, nobody's going to tell me anything. I'll just more. That I could not be ground under. I'd just sail right on, and I did sail on through a number of relationships and plays and films and everything else.
Yes, you showed them, didn't you?
They'll put up with a lot if, you know, maybe you're God-given, you have a talent. I thought I didn't have much. I couldn't accept success, accept any of the, here's this low self-esteem again, and then we start drinking.
I was the typical housewife alcoholic. I did all my drinking in the home, after I did the marketing, after I came home from the party. And they said, "Oh, you couldn't be an alcoholic, Joan. You're too nice." Oh, good. My alcoholism began with daily cocktails with my husband. We had a cocktail every night all through our married life. Loved it. But those daily cocktails turned to a horror story, because I went from 2 drinks to 3 drinks to 5 drinks.
I got so I hated myself more and more, thinking of all the harm I'd done to the sweetest girl in the world that loved me so much. I got so I cursed myself for a lousy bastard every time I saw myself in the mirror. I just felt such pity for her. It drove me crazy. You'd never believe it, would you? A guy like me knocked about so much that feels such pity. And it got so I wound up every night, my face buried in her lap, bawling and begging for forgiveness.
Finally, with my husband, disgust won out. And one morning he said to me, "Get out. Get out of our lives." And for me, that was the turning point.
The ultimate confrontation.
That was the crisis I needed, to take a look at, my God, you're losing everything you ever worked for and loved.
You talked a lot about not being able to stop, and the promises and the promises and promises, and I felt that. And I was wondering how you stopped.
I tell you, it was so strong with me. I had a wreck, an automobile accident, in which I tore my face off and everything else. And I was between life and death for 10 days. No one even knew. I didn't even know where I was, if I'd ever make it, nor did anyone else. It happened when I was in between jobs on the West Coast in 1972. Oddly enough, had been signed to do a film, and I had to go down and get my passport. Went downtown, started drinking my way back in the middle of the day to my home. Stopped, had lunch and had drinks in the valley, then went to a friend of mine who lived up in the mountains, who ran a restaurant up there, and I drank the night with him. Closed the place up with him, and drove 6 miles to my house, down a canyon road. which I had driven 1,000 times. I knew every turn. I fell asleep on the last turn. I was 800 yards from the house, down toward the sea. And I fell asleep on the last turn, like this. 1, 2. That was all it took. But I woke up when I started to skid out on this turn. I knew I was going to go over the edge, so I cut the car the other way and spun into a mountain. Boom. And the mirror is right here, went right through the face, took off. It took everything from here on down, really. Smashed everything. I didn't drink after that for a while, but you know that even that would not make me stop. When that didn't make me stop, I found that love made me, my wife. Love, support, and my love for the theater. 2 loves made. They say the work is the last thing to go. Well, the work was going. But a series of events, the accident, the beginning again, my wife, my work, my children, and all of a sudden that did it. That put it right where it had to be for me. I mean, that was how I stopped.
It was never cured. Mm-hmm. We're recovering alcoholics. There isn't any cure for alcoholism. You read the newspapers, they took the cure. No such animal. You have one day, you're 1 drink away from being a drunk. And as long as you realize you're 1 drink away from being a drunk, you've got your sobriety, because you know what awaits you.
If we could let everybody know that we're recovered alcoholics and not reformed drunks.
Yeah. The word, you are an alcoholic, if someone had said that to me when I was drinking, I would, of course, denied it. They probably thought in the old way that an alcoholic was a guy down in the Bowery or something. I thought I was better than those guys. I believe there's still a very, very big stigma connected with alcoholism.
Jason, I want to... my name is Peter, and I'm an alcoholic, and I think all of us who are alcoholic owe you and people like Betty Ford a tremendous vote of thanks, because you're not just a star, you're a superstar, and I think everybody knows that. And for you to do what you've done, to raise your head above the crowd and say, I have this thing, I think will do more to erase the stigma of this disease and the misconception that people who have it are in some way weak-willed moral lepers or something of that sort.
I was in Tennessee recently in some small town outside of Knoxville, and somebody secretly asked me, we're ashamed, you know, to ask me where they could get help. They'd seen that public service announcement I'd done.
Jason Robards.
I'm Jason Robards, and I'm alcoholic. I thought only losers became alcoholics. Then I learned it's a disease that could have killed me. I don't drink anymore. I feel good all the time. The physical sensation of not drinking is that I feel better all the time. I would get to a point, I would feel fine at a certain number of drinks. And then hangovers are the whips and snakes in the morning. Not DTs, but just those sort of things. I better have a drink here just to quiet it down, you know. Peckinpah and I on a film. Well, how are you this morning? Better see if we're all right here. Then we calm down, see what we're going to shoot now. But they didn't have any more of those things, you see. So it was all right. Your own health, your own system will confront you with it physically at one point. It will be so bad, you may just want to reach out. And I must say that you must reach out. And the minute you reach out, you find an incredible amount of friends out there. Where you think you're alone and lonely with it, it isn't true at all. The support, it's like suddenly inflating one of these balloons in Central Park. A beautiful color will go boom. The support is incredible. You start to float off into a whole other area. Well, I'm alive. I tried to die, and I didn't. And I was drinking. Now I'm not. I'm alive because I'm not drinking. I'm sure I'd be dead if I were drinking.
Now, if someone you care about is an alcoholic, we're going to tell you where to go for help. That'll be in just a moment.
"2020", sponsored by BMW.
powerful piece, that Jason Robards piece. And I understand that he first did those scenes from The Iceman Cometh at the Mayo Clinic, who understood how important drama was to portray the destructiveness of alcoholism.
Yes, yes. It's a powerful way to do it, actually. You know, our advisor for this report, Dr. Nicholas Pace, he's a leader in alcoholic rehabilitation programs. He advises us that the National Council on Alcoholism has local chapters across the country that can tell you where to get help. And, of course, there are marvelous organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon, and so forth that can offer support as well. You can really go to your phone book just under the word alcohol, and it's easy to get help when you know you really want it.
It's important to know how you can find it.
Indeed so.
In just the few seconds that we have left, you know, John Stossel, many of you know from watching, his wife is pregnant. Well, he had a baby girl yesterday morning with a little help from his wife, but we congratulate the Stossels and the new member.
7.5 pounds, and congratulations to John. And this word about tonight's Nightline. Tonight, Ted Koppel will look at today's developments in the Gary Dotson rape case, whose accuser now is saying that the rape never happened. Guests include Gloria Steinem, who will comment on the impact this case could have on women in the prosecution of other rape cases. That's Nightline, following your local news. And that's 2020 for tonight. We are in touch, so you be in touch. I'm Hugh Downs.
And I'm Barbara Walters.
And for all of us at 2020, good night.
Good Morning America, find out how people feel about the sexy rock music lyrics their children listen to. Also, Cheryl Ladd and Diane Carroll tomorrow on Good Morning America. Saturday, Isaac drives the crew crazy when he falls for a gorgeous girl's self-help philosophy on the Love Boat. Then John Ritter has lost his wife and Sharon Glass has been dumped by her lover. Together they learn to cope in Letting Go, an ABC movie special. Later tonight, a look at UFOs on Eye on Hollywood.
For a transcript of tonight's broadcast, send $3 to Journal Graphics, Box 2020, Ansonia Station, New York, New York, 10023. This has been the ABC News Magazine 2020.